Hello, Marcus. This is Zephyr Vortanian. I believe you have some questions for me. Marcus sank into the office chair, staring at the silver vehicle that seemed to pulse with inner light. Mr. Vortanian, I was beginning to think you were a myth. Not a myth, just temporarily displaced, Zephyr replied, his voice carrying a slight accent that Marcus couldn't identify. I'm calling from roughly 200 years in your future, where I'm enjoying a well-earned retirement. But I wanted to check on how you're adapting to your new responsibilities. Adapting is an interesting word for it, Marcus said. I've had visits from the Temporal Regulation Authority, customers from across multiple centuries, and now a vehicle made of light. Some days I feel like I'm managing it, other days I feel completely lost. Zephyr laughed, a warm sound that made him seem more human despite the impossible circumstances of their conversation. That's exactly how I felt for the first few years. Running a temporal automotive facility is unlike anything else in the universe. You're essentially operating at the intersection of advanced technology, complex bureaucracy, and interdimensional diplomacy. Why didn't you warn me about the TRA? Marcus asked. Because you needed to handle that confrontation yourself, Zephyr replied. The TRA tests every new operator, looking for weaknesses they can exploit. If you'd been prepared for their visit, they would have known I was still providing guidance, and they would have used that to invalidate your independence claim. By handling the situation on your own with support from your customers, of course, you established your legitimacy as the garage's new owner. Marcus looked at the silver vehicle again. And this? That's my personal transport. I thought it was time we met face to face, so to speak. The vehicle contains a temporal communication array that will allow us to have a proper conversation about your new career. As Zephyr spoke, the silver vehicle's surface began to shift and change, forming what appeared to be a comfortable seating area inside its translucent hull. Marcus approached cautiously and found that he could pass through the vehicle's surface as if it were made of warm water. Inside, the space was larger than the exterior suggested, with comfortable seating and control panels that displayed information in symbols that somehow made sense despite being unlike anything he'd ever seen. "Welcome to my mobile office," Zephyr said, his voice now coming from speakers that seemed to be built into the vehicle's structure itself. "This is where I conducted most of my business during the later years of running the garage." "Where are you actually calling from?" Marcus asked, settling into a seat that adjusted automatically to his body. "A research facility on Europa, Jupiter's moon. It's 2247 local time. I've been working with a team of scientists studying the long-term effects of temporal commerce on timeline stability. Fascinating work, though I do miss the hands-on mechanical aspects of automotive repair." Marcus spent the next hour learning about the true scope of his new business. According to Zephyr, the garage served as a critical maintenance hub for temporal travelers throughout a roughly 300-year span of human history. Vehicles from the early 21st century through the mid-24th century regularly required service that couldn't be performed in their home time periods, either due to technological limitations or regulatory restrictions. "Think of it as a neutral zone," Zephyr explained. "Your time period is technologically advanced enough to service vehicles from the near future, but not so advanced that working on primitive early 21st century technology becomes impossible. Plus, the legal framework we established provides protection from most temporal regulatory agencies." "Most?" Marcus asked. "The TRA was the biggest threat, but there are others. The temporal police from 2156 occasionally investigate operations they consider suspicious. The Department of Timeline Integrity from 2203 monitors facilities that serve customers from multiple eras. The Interdimensional Commerce Commission from 2298 regulates businesses that work with technology from parallel timelines." Marcus felt a familiar sensation of being overwhelmed by the complexity of his situation. "How did you manage all of this?" Very carefully, and with a lot of help from customers who became friends over the years, Zephyr said. The temporal community is smaller than you might expect. Once you establish a reputation for reliable service and discretion, word spreads quickly across multiple time periods. Most of your customers will actively help protect the garage because they depend on your services. Speaking of customers, Marcus said, I've been getting inquiries from people in my own time period. How do I handle that? Very carefully, Zephyr repeated. Contemporary customers can be useful for maintaining your cover as a normal auto repair shop, but they can also create complications. I generally accepted conventional repair work during slow periods, but I was always careful to keep temporal customers separated from contemporary ones. The conversation continued for several hours, with Zephyr providing detailed guidance on everything from advanced diagnostic procedures to managing payments in currencies that wouldn't exist for decades. Marcus learned about the informal network of temporal automotive professionals, the hidden supply chains that moved parts and materials across centuries, and the delicate diplomatic relationships that kept the entire system functioning. One more thing, Zephyr said as their conversation wound down. You're going to receive some unusual job offers over the next few months. Government agencies from various time periods will try to recruit you for special projects. Some of these offers will be legitimate and potentially lucrative. Others will be attempts to gain control over your operation. How do I tell the difference? Marcus asked. Trust your instincts. Your military experience taught you to recognize when someone is trying to manipulate you. Those same skills apply here. Legitimate offers will respect your independence and provide clear, honest information about what they're asking you to do. Manipulation attempts will use pressure tactics, vague threats, or promises that seem too good to be true. After Zephyr ended the call, Marcus spent the evening reviewing everything he'd learned. The garage that he'd bought for 2 credits was apparently a crucial piece of infrastructure for temporal civilization, protected by complex legal agreements and supported by customers who spanned centuries. His role was part mechanic, part diplomat, and part guardian of technology that could reshape human history. The next morning brought the first test of Zephyr's warnings. Marcus arrived at the garage to find a woman in a crisp business suit waiting by the front door. She introduced herself as Director Amanda Foster from the Department of Future Technologies, a government agency he'd never heard of. Mr. Rodriguez, she began, we've been monitoring your work with great interest. The technical skills you've demonstrated with temporal automotive systems suggest that you might be qualified for some very special projects we're developing. What kind of projects? Marcus asked, unlocking the garage and motioning for her to follow him inside. Classified research into advanced propulsion systems, Director Foster replied, watching carefully as Marcus began his daily equipment checks. We're particularly interested in your experience with gravitic suspension systems and temporal engine modifications. Marcus continued his routine, considering his response. Director Foster's presentation was professional and her credentials appeared legitimate, but something about her demeanor reminded him of the TRA agents. Too smooth, too confident, too eager to get what she wanted. What kind of commitment would these projects require? He asked. Full-time relocation to our research facility in Nevada. We'd provide excellent compensation, of course, plus housing and access to technology that's decades ahead of anything available commercially. Red flags began appearing in Marcus's mind. What about my current business? We'd arrange for the garage to be transferred to more appropriate management, Director Foster said dismissively. Obviously, a facility like this requires proper government oversight. There it was, the manipulation Zephyr had warned him about. Director Foster wasn't offering Marcus a job. She was attempting to recruit him away from the garage so that her agency could take control of the operation. I appreciate the offer, Marcus said carefully, but I'm quite happy with my current situation. Director Foster's professional mask slipped slightly. "Mr. Rodriguez, I don't think you fully understand the significance of what we're offering. This is an opportunity to work on projects that could revolutionize human transportation technology. And I don't think you fully understand that I'm not interested," Marcus replied firmly. "I have a business to run here." The conversation became increasingly tense over the next few minutes, with Director Foster alternating between generous offers and subtle threats. Marcus recognized the tactics from military briefings about recruitment attempts by foreign intelligence services. The Department of Future Technologies might be a legitimate government agency, but their approach to acquiring the garage was anything but legitimate. Finally, Director Foster left with a promise that other opportunities might become available in the future. Marcus made a note to research the Department of Future Technologies and warn his temporal customers about potential government interest in their maintenance services. Later that week, Marcus received a very different kind of offer. Commander Walsh approached him after a routine maintenance appointment with a proposal that seemed both legitimate and intriguing. "Marcus," Walsh began, "I work for something called the Temporal Defense Corps. We're responsible for protecting timeline integrity from various threats across multiple time periods. We've been looking for someone with your unique qualifications to serve as a technical consultant." "What kind of consulting?" Marcus asked. "Occasionally, we encounter vehicles or equipment that have been modified for illegal temporal activities. Drug smuggling across time periods, unauthorized timeline manipulation, that sort of thing. We need someone who understands both the mechanical aspects and the legitimate uses of temporal technology to help us identify when systems have been modified for criminal purposes." Walsh's proposal was specific, honest, and respectful of Marcus's independence. The consulting work would be part-time and well-paid, without interfering with his regular business operations. More importantly, it would help protect the temporal community that had become his livelihood. "I'm interested," Marcus said, "but I'd want to review any cases that involve my regular customers. I won't participate in anything that could compromise the garage's neutrality." "Of course," Walsh agreed. "That's exactly the kind of ethical consideration we need from a consultant. Your reputation for discretion and integrity is one of the reasons we approached you." Marcus accepted the consulting position, beginning what would become a long and profitable relationship with the Temporal Defense Corps. The work was challenging and occasionally dangerous, but it provided valuable insight into the darker aspects of temporal technology while reinforcing his position as a trusted member of the temporal community. Over the following months, Marcus's business continued to grow and evolve. He developed relationships with suppliers from across multiple time periods, expanded his technical knowledge to include increasingly advanced systems, and built a reputation that attracted customers from throughout the temporal community. The garage that he'd bought for 2 credits had become the foundation of a business empire that spanned centuries, generating income that would have seemed impossible during his military career. But more importantly, Marcus had found a purpose that combined his mechanical skills, his leadership experience, and his desire to build something meaningful with his own hands. By the first anniversary of purchasing the garage, Marcus had established himself as one of the most respected temporal automotive professionals in the business. His customer base included government agencies, research institutions, and private individuals from across 3 centuries. His consulting work with the Temporal Defense Corps had led to several high-profile cases that enhanced his reputation throughout the temporal law enforcement community. But the most satisfying aspect of his new career was the knowledge that he was maintaining something important, a neutral zone, where temporal travelers could rely on honest, professional service regardless of their time period of origin or their reasons for traveling. The garage had become a small but crucial piece of the infrastructure that allowed temporal civilization to function. Marcus Rodriguez had bought an auto repair shop for 2 credits and inherited a legacy that spanned centuries. What had started as a desperate attempt to find affordable commercial property had become the foundation of a career. Marcus Rodriguez had seen enough combat zones to recognize when something was off, but nothing in his 12 years as a Marine had prepared him for the bizarre auction notice that appeared on his tablet that Tuesday morning. After 3 tours in Afghanistan and 2 in Syria, he'd retired to the quiet desert town of Millfield, Nevada, hoping to use his mechanical skills to run a small auto repair shop. The military pension wasn't much, but combined with his savings, it should have been enough to buy a modest garage and start over. The auction listing was buried deep in the legal notices section of the local newspaper's website. Commercial property auction, 1247 Desert Rose Boulevard, minimum bid, 2 credits. Marcus had to read it 3 times. 2 credits. In an economy where a cup of coffee cost 15 credits, this had to be a typo. He'd been searching for affordable commercial property for months, watching prices climb higher each week as big corporations bought up everything in sight. Marcus drove out to Desert Rose Boulevard that afternoon, following his GPS down increasingly desolate roads until he reached the address. What he found defied explanation. The building looked like someone had tried to disguise a spacecraft as an auto repair shop, with strange metallic panels that seemed to shift color in the sunlight and windows that appeared darker from the outside than they should have been. A faded sign read, "Zephyr's Galactic Automotive, all species welcome." The property was larger than he'd expected, with multiple bays and what appeared to be sophisticated equipment covered by tarps. Despite its unusual appearance, the bones of the operation looked solid. The concrete was in good condition, the electrical infrastructure seemed adequate, and there was enough space for a dozen vehicles. Marcus had learned to trust his instincts, and something about this place felt right, even if he couldn't explain why. The next morning, Marcus arrived at the county courthouse 30 minutes before the auction was scheduled to begin. He'd brought his entire savings, nearly 50,000 credits, expecting fierce competition for what appeared to be a prime commercial property. Instead, he found himself alone in the auction room with a nervous-looking clerk named Patricia Williams. "Are you here for the Desert Rose Boulevard auction?" Patricia asked, shuffling through papers with obvious discomfort. "Yes, ma'am. Property at 1247 Desert Rose Boulevard," Marcus replied, settling into a folding chair. Patricia glanced at the clock. "Well, it's 10 o'clock. I suppose we should begin." She cleared her throat and began reading from a script in a monotone voice. "We are here to auction the commercial property located at 1247 Desert Rose Boulevard, Millfield, Nevada. The minimum bid is 2 credits. Do I hear 2 credits?" Marcus raised his hand, feeling ridiculous. 2 credits. Patricia looked around the empty room hopefully. "Do I hear 3 credits? 3 credits." She waited a full minute before continuing. "Going once, going twice. Sold to Marcus Rodriguez for 2 credits." The paperwork took longer than the auction itself. Patricia kept apologizing and muttering under her breath about irregular circumstances and unusual instructions from the estate. When Marcus asked about the previous owner, her discomfort became even more pronounced. The owner was listed as, she squinted at the papers, Zephyr Vortanian. "I think that's how you pronounce it. Very reclusive individual. Never saw him myself. Always sent representatives to handle county business." She stamped the final document with more force than necessary. "The property transfers to you immediately, Mr. Rodriguez. All contents included." Marcus walked out of the courthouse holding the deed to a fully equipped auto repair shop, purchased for less than the cost of lunch. His practical military mind kept searching for the catch, but the paperwork appeared legitimate. Patricia had assured him multiple times that the sale was legal and binding, though she'd seemed eager to complete the transaction and move on to other business. That afternoon, Marcus returned to his new property with the keys Patricia had given him. The front door opened smoothly, revealing an interior that was somehow both familiar and completely alien. The main workspace was enormous, with hydraulic lifts that appeared far more advanced than anything he'd seen in civilian garages. Tool racks lined the walls, filled with implements that looked functional but subtly wrong: wrenches with too many angles, diagnostic equipment with displays showing symbols instead of numbers. The office area contained a desk made from what appeared to be a single piece of black stone, smooth as glass but warm to the touch. File cabinets lined one wall, and Marcus spent the rest of the afternoon exploring their contents. Most of the paperwork was standard business documentation: permits, tax records, supplier invoices, but written in handwriting that seemed to flow like water across the page. One file caught his attention: customer records dating back nearly 30 years. The names were mostly ordinary: Johnson, Peterson, Martinez, but the vehicles listed made no sense. Gravitic suspension realignment, quantum flux capacitor replacement, temporal drive calibration. Either Zephyr had been running some kind of elaborate fantasy game, or Marcus had stumbled into something far stranger than a simple auto repair shop. As evening approached, Marcus locked up his new property and drove home to his small apartment, his mind spinning with questions. The rational part of him insisted this was just an eccentric previous owner with unusual hobbies and creative bookkeeping. But his instincts, honed by years of military service, whispered that he'd walked into something bigger than he understood. The next morning brought the first sign that his 2-credit investment might be more complicated than expected. Marcus arrived at the garage to find a pristine silver sedan parked in front of the main bay, engine running, no driver visible. As he approached cautiously, the vehicle's door opened with a soft hiss, and the engine shut off automatically. Inside the car, Marcus found a repair order dated 3 years in the future. Temporal engine maintenance scheduled for July 15, 2127. Customer: Agent Sarah Morrison, Department of Temporal Affairs. The paper felt normal, but the ink seemed to shimmer slightly, and the date refused to change no matter how many times he read it. Marcus set the repair order on the office desk and stared at it for a long time. His military training had taught him to adapt quickly to unexpected situations, but this was testing the limits of his flexibility. The logical explanation was that someone was playing an elaborate prank, but the car was real, the paperwork felt authentic, and his new garage was definitely not normal by any conventional standard. By noon, 3 more vehicles had appeared in similar fashion: a motorcycle that hummed without visible exhaust, a pickup truck that seemed to be made entirely of some kind of flexible metal, and a small sports car that occasionally flickered as if not entirely present. Each came with repair orders dated years into the future, signed by customers with names that sounded almost but not quite right. Marcus spent the afternoon attempting to contact Patricia Williams at the county courthouse, hoping to get more information about Zephyr Vortanian and the circumstances of the property sale. The phone rang endlessly without answer, and when he drove to the courthouse in person, he was told that Patricia had taken unexpected leave and wouldn't be available for several weeks. The county clerk who replaced her, an elderly man named Harold Chen, seemed genuinely confused by Marcus's questions. "I don't show any record of an auction yesterday," Harold said, scrolling through computer screens with growing bewilderment. "In fact, I don't show any record of a Patricia Williams working here at all." Marcus showed Harold the deed and sale paperwork. The documents appeared to confuse Harold even more. "These look legitimate and they're properly notarized, but I don't understand how." He trailed off, studying the paperwork more closely. "Mr. Rodriguez, I've worked here for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like this. The property was definitely sold to you, that much is clear, but the circumstances are highly irregular." Driving back to the garage that evening, Marcus realized he was facing a choice. He could walk away from the whole situation, forfeit his 2 credits, and pretend none of this had happened. Or he could embrace the mystery and see where it led. His military experience had taught him that sometimes the most important missions were the ones that didn't make sense at first. The garage felt different when he returned that evening, more alive somehow. The strange tools seemed to hum with potential energy, and the vehicles waiting for repair no longer struck him as impossible, just unfamiliar. Marcus had spent his career maintaining military equipment that most civilians would consider impossibly complex. Perhaps this was simply the next level of complexity. He pulled out the first repair order, the one for Agent Morrison's temporal engine, and studied it carefully. Despite the unusual terminology, the basic structure was familiar. Diagnostic procedures, part specifications, estimated completion time. Someone expected him to perform this work, and they trusted him enough to leave an expensive vehicle in his care. Marcus Rodriguez had bought an auto repair shop for 2 credits and inherited customers from the future. The rational part of his mind insisted this was impossible, but his hands were already reaching for the unfamiliar tools, and his mechanic's instincts were beginning to make sense of the alien equipment surrounding him. The Department of Temporal Affairs repair order listed a contact number. Marcus stared at his phone for 10 minutes before dialing, unsure what he would say if someone actually answered. The phone rang twice before a crisp, professional voice responded. "Agent Morrison, Temporal Affairs. You must be Marcus Rodriguez." "How did you?" Marcus began, then stopped himself. "Yes, ma'am. I have your vehicle here for temporal engine maintenance." "Excellent. Zephyr spoke very highly of your qualifications before he retired. We're looking forward to working with you, Mr. Rodriguez. When can you have the maintenance completed?" Marcus looked at the repair order again. The date was still 3 years in the future. "According to this paperwork, you're not expecting it until 2127. Agent Morrison laughed, a warm sound that made her seem more human despite the impossible conversation. "Time works differently in our line of work, Mr. Rodriguez. From your perspective, we need the maintenance completed by next Tuesday. Will that be sufficient time for you to familiarize yourself with the equipment?" "Next Tuesday," Marcus repeated slowly. "And you're calling from?" 2127, of course. But don't worry about the temporal mechanics right now. Zephyr left detailed maintenance manuals in the office filing cabinet. 3rd drawer down, folder marked Temporal Engine Systems. You'll find everything you need to know. The call ended before Marcus could ask any of the dozen questions crowding his mind. He walked to the office and opened the 3rd drawer of the filing cabinet. The folder was exactly where Agent Morrison had said it would be, thick with technical diagrams and step-by-step procedures written in the same flowing handwriting he'd seen throughout the garage. As Marcus opened the manual and began reading, he realized that Zephyr Vortanian hadn't just left him a garage, he'd left him a legacy. The previous owner had clearly been preparing for this transition, leaving detailed instructions not just for vehicle maintenance, but for managing customers who existed across multiple timelines, handling payments in currencies that wouldn't be invented for decades, and maintaining the delicate balance between normal auto repair work and something far more extraordinary. The next few days fell into a rhythm that felt both alien and familiar. Marcus would arrive each morning to find new vehicles waiting for service, each accompanied by repair orders that defied conventional understanding of time and space. But the actual work was surprisingly similar to what he'd done in the military: complex diagnostic procedures, precision repairs, and meticulous attention to detail. The temporal engine maintenance turned out to be analogous to overhauling a helicopter turbine, just with components that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The gravitic suspension systems were essentially advanced hydraulics that manipulated gravity instead of fluid pressure. Once Marcus stopped trying to understand the physics and focused on the mechanical principles, the work became manageable. By Friday, he'd completed repairs on 6 vehicles and had begun to establish relationships with his unusual customer base. Agent Morrison was professional and courteous, always calling exactly when she said she would despite being decades in the future. Dr. Elizabeth Hayes, who owned the flickering sports car, was a research scientist from 2089 who seemed genuinely interested in Marcus's military background. Commander James Walsh, whose gravitic motorcycle needed regular tune-ups, was some kind of space pilot who appreciated Marcus's attention to detail. Marcus had stumbled into the strangest auto repair job in history, but for the first time since leaving the military, he felt like he was exactly where he belonged. The work was challenging, the customers were interesting, and he was building something meaningful with his own hands. But on Friday afternoon, everything changed when a familiar black sedan pulled up outside the garage, and two men in expensive suits climbed out with expressions that promised trouble. The older man introduced himself as Director Vincent Crawford from something called the Temporal Regulation Authority. His partner, Agent David Kim, remained silent but alert, scanning the garage interior with obvious professional interest. Both men carried themselves with the confident authority Marcus recognized from federal investigators he'd encountered during his military career. "Mr. Rodriguez," Director Crawford began, his voice carrying the practiced smoothness of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. "We need to discuss your recent acquisition of this property and the irregular business activities you've been conducting here." Marcus set down the temporal flux regulator he'd been calibrating and wiped his hands on a shop rag. "What kind of irregular activities?" "Operating an unlicensed temporal automotive facility," Agent Kim spoke for the first time, pulling out a tablet and scrolling through what appeared to be surveillance records. "Servicing vehicles from multiple timeline jurisdictions without proper certification, accepting payments in non-contemporary currencies. The list is quite extensive." Crawford stepped forward, his expression sympathetic but firm. "Look, Mr. Rodriguez, we understand this isn't your fault. Zephyr Vortanian operated outside normal regulatory frameworks for decades, and clearly he failed to inform you about the legal requirements for this type of business. We're prepared to be reasonable." "What kind of reasonable?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew where this conversation was heading. "The Temporal Regulation Authority is authorized to purchase properties like this at fair market value when they come into civilian hands without proper licensing," Crawford explained, producing a contract from his briefcase. "We're prepared to offer you 50,000 credits for the property and equipment, significantly more than you paid plus relocation assistance, and help finding a conventional auto repair facility." Marcus scanned the contract quickly. The offer was generous by normal standards, but after a week working with technology that existed decades beyond anything in the contemporary world, 50,000 credits felt like pocket change. More importantly, the military had taught him to be suspicious of anyone who showed up with a solution that was too good to be true. "What happens if I decline your generous offer?" Marcus asked. Agent Kim's expression hardened slightly. "Then we would be forced to pursue regulatory enforcement through official channels. Unlicensed temporal operations violate several federal statutes, not to mention international treaties governing cross-timeline commerce. The penalties can be quite severe." "I'd need to think about it," Marcus said carefully. "Of course," Crawford replied, but his tone suggested that thinking about it was a formality rather than a real option. "We'll need an answer by Monday morning. I'm sure you understand that operations like this can't continue indefinitely without proper oversight." After the TRA agents left, Marcus spent the weekend researching everything he could find about temporal regulation, the legal status of his garage, and the mysterious Zephyr Vortanian. What he discovered was frustrating and enlightening in equal measure. The Temporal Regulation Authority was a real organization, established by international treaty in 2019 to oversee time travel-related activities and prevent temporal paradoxes. but their authority seemed to be limited to operations that posed genuine risks to timeline stability. A small auto repair shop servicing vehicles from the future didn't appear to meet those criteria, especially since Marcus was clearly working within established systems rather than creating new temporal disruptions. More interesting was what he learned about Zephyr Vortanian. Public records were sparse, but Marcus found references to a series of lawsuits between Zephyr and the TRA dating back 15 years. Apparently, the previous owner had been fighting to maintain his independence from federal oversight, arguing that his automotive repair services were protected under existing commercial regulations and posed no threat to temporal stability. The last lawsuit had been settled out of court 6 months before Zephyr's retirement, with terms that remained confidential. But the timing suggested that Zephyr's decision to sell the garage might have been related to pressure from the TRA rather than simple retirement plans. On Monday morning, Marcus was waiting when Director Crawford and Agent Kim returned. But he wasn't alone. 3 of his customers had arrived early for their appointments: Agent Morrison from 2127, Dr. Hayes from 2089, and Commander Walsh from somewhere even further in the future. All 3 were standing near their vehicles with expressions that suggested they were prepared for more than a casual conversation. "Mr. Rodriguez," Crawford began, then paused as he noticed the additional people. "I hope you've had time to consider our offer." "I have," Marcus replied, "and I've decided to decline." Agent Kim stepped forward aggressively. "Mr. Rodriguez, I don't think you fully understand the legal implications of your decision. We have authority to shut down this operation immediately if necessary." "Actually," Agent Morrison interrupted, her voice carrying an authority that made both TRA agents freeze, "you don't." She produced a badge that seemed to shimmer with its own light. "Agent Sarah Morrison, Department of Temporal Affairs, Federal Timeline Protection Division. Mr. Rodriguez's operation falls under our jurisdiction, not yours." Crawford's professional composure cracked slightly. "The TRA has regulatory authority over all temporal commercial activities." "The TRA has authority over unregulated temporal activities that pose risks to timeline stability," Dr. Hayes corrected, stepping forward with her own credentials. "Mr. Rodriguez is operating under a grandfather clause established by the Temporal Commerce Protection Act of 2089. His business predates your current regulatory framework by decades." Commander Walsh, who had remained silent until now, spoke with the calm authority of someone accustomed to command situations. "Director Crawford, I suggest you review Section 12 of the Intertemporal Treaty of 2156 before taking any enforcement action here. Mr. Rodriguez's customers include several federal agencies from multiple time periods. Interference with our vehicle maintenance could have serious implications for ongoing temporal security operations." The confrontation lasted another 20 minutes, with increasingly complex legal citations and references to regulations that wouldn't exist for decades. Marcus found himself caught between admiration for his customers' knowledge and bewilderment at the bureaucratic complexity of intertemporal law. Finally, Crawford and Kim retreated to their sedan to make phone calls to superiors who apparently existed in various time periods. When they returned, Crawford's expression had shifted from confident authority to frustrated resignation. "Mr. Rodriguez," he said stiffly, "it appears that your operation does indeed fall under federal protection. However, this doesn't end our interest in your activities. The TRA will be monitoring this facility closely to ensure compliance with all applicable regulations." After the TRA agents left, Marcus found himself surrounded by customers who seemed surprisingly invested in his success. Agent Morrison explained that Zephyr's garage had become an essential part of the temporal transportation infrastructure, providing reliable maintenance for vehicles that couldn't be serviced in their home time periods. Zephyr spent years fighting to establish the legal framework that protects this place. Dr. Hayes added. He knew that eventually he'd need to retire, and he spent considerable effort ensuring that his successor would be able to continue the work without regulatory interference. "Why me?" Marcus asked. "I had no experience with temporal technology." Commander Walsh smiled for the first time since Marcus had met him. According to Zephyr, that was exactly why he chose you. He said that someone with military mechanical experience would be able to learn the technical aspects quickly, but more importantly, someone with your background would have the integrity and determination to maintain the independence of this operation. He researched you for months before arranging the auction, Agent Morrison added. Your military record, your mechanical skills, your financial situation, even your personality profile. Zephyr was convinced that you were the right person to carry on his work. Marcus realized that his 2-credit purchase had been anything but random. Zephyr Vortanian had orchestrated every aspect of the transition, from the suspicious auction to the legal protections that kept the TRA at bay. Marcus hadn't stumbled into an unusual business opportunity. He'd been carefully selected and recruited for a job that existed at the intersection of mechanical skill and temporal diplomacy. Over the following weeks, Marcus settled into his new role with growing confidence. The technical aspects of temporal automotive repair continued to challenge him, but his military background served him well in dealing with the bureaucratic complexities of intertemporal commerce. He learned to navigate regulations that existed across multiple time periods, manage customers whose appointments might be scheduled decades apart, and maintain equipment that operated according to physics he didn't fully understand but could work with effectively. The TRA continued their surveillance, with agents occasionally appearing to observe his work or ask pointed questions about specific repairs. But Marcus's customers provided both legal protection and practical support, sharing information about regulatory requirements and helping him establish relationships with suppliers who could provide parts and materials from various time periods. 3 months after buying the garage, Marcus received his first payment large enough to understand the true scope of his new business. Agent Morrison's temporal engine maintenance, which had taken him a week to complete, generated a payment of 37,000 credits from the Department of Temporal Affairs. Dr. Hayes's gravitic suspension work earned him 15,000 credits from a research foundation that wouldn't exist for 70 years. Commander Walsh's motorcycle tune-up resulted in a payment of 8,000 credits in rare metals that were apparently quite valuable in the contemporary market. Marcus Rodriguez had inadvertently become one of the most successful auto repair business owners in Nevada, despite having customers who existed primarily in the future and working with technology that defied conventional understanding. The garage that he'd bought for 2 credits was generating more income than he'd earned during his entire military career. But success brought new challenges. Word of his unusual operation had begun to spread through both conventional and temporal channels. Marcus started receiving inquiries from potential customers in his own time period, people who'd heard rumors about the garage that could repair anything and wanted to bring their conventional vehicles to see what he could do with them. At the same time, his reputation in the temporal automotive community was growing. Vehicles began arriving from time periods farther and farther in the future, with increasingly complex repair requirements and increasingly generous compensation offers. Marcus found himself working on technology that wouldn't be invented for centuries, guided by repair manuals that seemed to update themselves as he worked. The situation reached a turning point when a sleek, silver vehicle materialized in his main bay one Tuesday morning, without any of the usual advanced scheduling. The vehicle appeared to be made entirely of light, shifting and flowing like liquid mercury, but maintaining a solid, functional form. No repair order accompanied it, and no customer contact information was provided. Marcus was examining the vehicle cautiously when his phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize, but when he answered, The voice was unmistakably familiar. "Hello, Marcus. This is Zephyr Vortanian. I believe you have some questions for me."